And welcome to day 5 of the teach-in on race, racism, and anti-racism. I am Michelle Loyd-Paige, and I serve as the Executive Associate to the President for Diversity and Inclusion. And I can tell you, I have enjoyed this whole week. All the presentations have been really dynamic. All the presentations have had a lot of food for thought, some challenges, as well as some observations to get me thinking about, okay, is there more that I could be doing? And I'm hoping that that's something that all our participants have been experiencing as well, just wanting to learn a bit more about what is it that they can do. I should also let you know that all of our sessions are being recorded and they will be available at a later date for viewing at another time. If you're like me, you'll want to go back and rewatch some of the presentations because the presentations just had so much information. It's been a long day, so my words might get a little jumbled, but just hang in there with me. But you will notice that I am not by myself today, and that's because my co-presenter, Ms. Kieychia Likely, is with me. And Kieychia, if you could just briefly introduce yourself, and then we'll jump into the session.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. So happy to be here this evening. My name is Kieychia Likely, and I serve as the Assistant Director for Student Engagement and Thriving in the CSID office. A large body of my work deals with mentoring initiatives as well as first-generation students and our most vulnerable students populations on campus. So I welcome you to this session this afternoon, and I'm so excited to be here with Michelle.
And, you know, this session came about, it was, I think, sometime during the summer. The whole summer is kind of a blur. And Kieychia and I were talking, and she suggested, you know, we need to have a session on she said, you need to have a session on microaggressions. And I said, you mean we should have a session on microaggressions? And then we had that planned. And then when we got closer to the start of the semester, and then when I realized that we're going to have this event, this teach-in on race, racism, and anti-racism, I thought we would broaden the conversation just a bit to talk about racial battle fatigue, because the basis of racial battle fatigue is microaggression. So that's going to be our presentation today. So if you were, I know someone had reached out and said, wait a minute, I thought I saw something on racial microaggressions and then it disappeared. Well, this is that session. And this session is going to be even better because Kieychia is with me today. So let's get started.
Awesome. So what I want to say first is that this is just a starting point for this conversation. The hope is that this will just be a launching pad for further conversations and further trainings to come. So what are our learning outcomes? The first is to be engaged in this workshop. You will increase your awareness of racial microaggressions and its relationship to racial battle fatigue, define racial battle fatigue and its identity, that it impacts on marginalized people, and identify coping strategies for ourselves and strategies that support marginalized students, faculty, and staff of color on our campus.
Thank you. Yeah, our learning outcomes. You'll hear in this that we're talking about racial battle fatigue, you know, and we want all this to happen. But we also want you to know that even though our conversation is focused on racial microaggressions are not just about race, but that's what we are going to be focusing on today. So here's my questions that I have. It's a pop quiz. It's the professor and me, just can't help it. So ask yourselves, how often have these things happened to you, where you felt like you were treated with less courtesy than other people are, or that you're treated with less respect than other people are, or that you receive poor service than other people at restaurants or stores, or that people act as if they don't think you're smart or you're not smart, that people act as if they are afraid of you. They walk away from you, they avoid you. People act as if they think you're dishonest, like, you know, they hide the purse, you know, they lock it up. People act as if they're better than you are. You are called names or insulted, or as my mom would say, you know, someone calls you out your name, or you are threatened or harassed. I'm asking these questions about how often do these things happen to you? And unfortunately, I have to tell you that all of these things have happened to me.
So let's take a deeper dive into what a microaggression is. A microaggression is a subtle act of racism that can cause stress, harm, and damage to people of or other ethnic minorities. These racial instances can be so understated in their delivery or message that the recipient of the microaggression might not even be aware of the intent until after it's happened. The person is left wondering just what the statement meant at times and asking themselves if what just happened really actually happened. Over time, in consistently dealing over and over again with microaggressions, people of color may begin to feel emotionally drained, psychologically demeaned, and socially guarded. In this, it's important to note that on an average, a person of color experiences, sometimes unknowingly, between 3 to 5 microaggressions a day. Those microaggressions can be big or small, but on average, it's important to note that this can happen 3 to 5 times a day.
And if you didn't realize those questions that I have asked, those are all microaggressions. And those 3 to 5 things a day doesn't necessarily mean that they're stretched out over 24 hours. Sometimes it can all happen in the same hour. But it's these little slight things. And so the chart that I have up for you now is part of a larger document. Gerald Wing Sue has created this kind of definition and this kind of flow chart about how to unpack microaggressions, because they don't all have the same kind of impact. And so with racial microaggressions, understand that these are these common everyday things. We're not talking about those big, very obvious acts of racism. We're not talking about someone coming and placing a cross in your yard and setting it on fire. We're not talking about someone putting on a KKK hood or putting a noose outside your door. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about these little everyday things that cause you to wonder what in the world is going on. It's these commonplace, everyday, verbal or behavioral indignities. And they can be intentional or unintentional. That is so important to understand. It can be intentional or it can be unintentional, but all of them communicate that hostility, they're derogatory, and they're negative slights and insults that have you wondering, what in the world is going on? Do I belong here? So there are these 4 categories that we can see microaggressions manifesting. There's the micro insults, and you'll notice that afterwards it says in parentheses, often unconscious, right? So these micro insults are these remarks or the comments that are just, kind of sideways kinds of things, saying something about a person's racial heritage or their identity, insensitive remarks. These are micro insults. On the Whoops. How about we do that? Sorry about that. I thought I was sharing my slides. So whoever was in the chat that did that, thank you so much. So these micro insults. Yes, so those are micro insults. On the other is the micro invalidations. Micro invalidations are also something that is unconscious. And these unconscious things, these are these verbal comments or behaviors that either exclude, they just deny that you're even there. It's like you become invisible. And they nullify your feelings. You try to voice, wait a minute, I was offended. Oh, you weren't offended. That wasn't a thing. Or you're so oversensitive. In the center, you see micro assaults. Micro assaults are often conscious. These are explicitly racial statements and characterizations that are verbally violent or nonverbal attacks that are meant to hurt an individual. You know when you're doing one of these things. You meant to call someone a name. You meant to hurt them. You meant for them to feel like they didn't belong or that they were less than you are. So here we have on these opposite ends of this diagram, the micro insults, the micro invalidations, and in the center you have this micro assaults. But all of these can feed into environmental microaggressions, which is something that happens on the macro level. This environmental microaggressions is when the racial assaults, the insults, and invalidations, which are manifested on a systemic and environmental levels. It becomes acceptable within the community that you can just do this and get away with it. Or perhaps it's the symbols, it's the signs, it's the name of buildings, it's all those things that are a reminder that you really don't belong other, or that you are less than. Let me give you an example that's not related to Calvin, because I'm not going to just jump on Calvin today. But before COVID, when I was invited to go speak at different churches, one of the first things that I would do is look at, if they had pictures on the walls, what were the pictures of? What were the pictures in the program or the bulletin? If there were no people of color, except as the poor African children being helped by the missionaries that they sent, that gave me a different kind of vibe than if I saw pictures of, multicultural pictures that were on the wall celebrating people as adults and celebrating people who look like me as people who were more than just people who needed assistance, more than just people who needed help. If that was my environment, where everything around me was telling me that I was not important, that I always need help, that sends a particular kind of message. And that's a microaggression, an environmental microaggression.
Another microaggression that some of our students on campus experience is the idea that every person of color has to be a first-generation student. And so oftentimes our students of color are asked or assumed that they are first generation.
Yeah, like you couldn't possibly be here with having family members who have gone to college. Even if they hadn't gone to Calvin, that you even had family members who would know anything like that.
So we're going to throw some dilemmas at you and kind of take a deeper dive into what is perceived by people of color and what is perceived by white people. So our first slide is called a clash of racial realities. So for people of color, white people treat people of color as inferior. For white people of color and ethnic minorities are doing well. For people of color, racism is still a part of daily life. For white people, there is no more racism, or it's just frankly that racism is on the decline. Of course, you had Obama as president, even though he was a person of mixed ancestry. For people of color, the educational, housing, financial, occupational playing fields are very much unlevel. For white people, the educational, housing, financial, occupation playing fields are very much on a level playing field. And so some may even say that there's reverse racism at play as well when you get into scholarship funding and how those scholarships play out. It's important to remember that as a person of color, we have to have time to process these things in these situations as it happens. And we have to deal with the reality of living a racialized experience on a daily basis.
And Kieychia, I would tag in with this. What this is demonstrating, it's just this class of racial realities, right? And it doesn't mean that, okay, all people of color think this and all white people think
Exactly.
differently. But what we're demonstrating is that there are these trends or these patterns. And when we have these different understandings of reality, they clash. And so how can we make progress if on the one hand, people of color for the most part are thinking, racism is a part of my daily life, not just a part of daily life in general, but racism is a part of my daily life. I'm always having to recognize that I'm walking around in a racialized context, whether I am in a place like Calvin or I'm in some other place. I'm always having to negotiate what this means. But if you have the majority people or white people who are saying, "Oh, racism isn't that bad anymore," and this isn't just a saying. I mean, there have been the oh, I'm going to forget the research. I should have wrote it down, but there was just some research done. That was on an earlier discussion that I did, where that a lot of Christians, I think it was like 19% of Christians that were surveyed after this summer, said that racism wasn't a big deal, that racism wasn't an issue. 19% of Christians feeling like, and these are people who are going to church, who identify themselves as Christian, not just people who are wearing a cross and you assume they're Christian, the people who are 19% after this summer saying that racism isn't a deal. That's a clash of racial realities. And then, so when we ask the question, why aren't we moving any further? We don't even have a same understanding of what's going on.
Another thing, Michelle, to note is that even after this summer, people of color are noticing, not really noticing, but kind of being, bringing it to the forefront that our color is preceding us before we get to the door. And that has become something that has been pushed to the forefront, that in the climates that we're in right now, our color precedes us before we even hit the door.
Yeah. And the assumptions that are made about our color, right? What it means.
Absolutely.
This color without assuming a race or ethnicity before they even know anything about us, creating this narrative that people don't often realize is based on a stereotype.
Correct.
Yeah, and it can be good sometimes. Like, oh, okay, I'm because I do want you to see that I'm a woman of color that identify as an African American woman. I do want you to see that. But I don't want you to take that and then begin to make assumptions about who I am. I would rather us have a conversation about what my experiences are before those assumptions are made, because you'll make some assumptions that aren't true. I'll give it, this might be a too much information, but it's a very good example of how someone's race preceding them and assumptions being made. When I was pregnant with my first child, had been married 2 years, so this was not a honeymoon baby or even a before the honeymoon baby. Had been married 2 years. My husband had super great insurance, so I got the best obstetrician in town, or found out who it was, went there for that appointment, and I was 27 at the time, and the OBGYN asked if this was my first pregnancy. I said yes. They said, "Are you sure? Are you sure this is your first pregnancy?" I said, I think I would know if I was pregnant before, but he couldn't, because so many people that he had seen, so many African American women that he had seen, it would have been unheard of for an African American woman to be 27 years old to have their first child. And so then what I did was invite my husband to come with me to the next one, and we got things straightened out. So let me go on. So another one, there's going to be a total of 4 dilemmas, is this invisibility of unintentional expressions of bias, right? Because sometimes our biases pop out, we don't intend to, but they come out. So here's a microaggressive incident, right? So either it's this micro insult, micro invalidation. So we're talking about those ends of that diagram. So something happens. How do we explain that? How do people notice that something just happened? So from a person of color, right, something happens, thinking, wow, this is showing racial bias on the part of the white perpetrator. White person in general was thinking, I'm not biased. This is not a part of white perpetration. I was just having a conversation. Other side, whether or not it was subconscious or it was meant as a joke, and I cannot tell you how many times I have heard that as the reasoning, is that, oh, it was only a joke. No matter whether it was intentional or not, meant as a joke or not, when I experience a microaggressive incident, it is insulting and it is demeaning. Other side, what is the interpretation? That maybe it was subconscious, or it was intended as a joke. I was just kidding. I heard it on SNL. I heard it on something. I just thought I would try it out here. Or I thought we were friends. Why are you being so sensitive? So that's invisibility of the unintentional expressions of bias. One more point. person of color is thinking, this is a pattern of similar racial incidents that happen in daily life. And so it just becomes cumulative. This is just one more thing. As Kieychia had said earlier, 3 to 5 microaggressions happen a day. We don't even notice them all the time. Sometimes it just takes having, going back home, having a conversation about the day, and then someone points it out. Oh, that was a microaggression. What? Oh, okay. Because we can just become so numb to it. On the other side, an incident is a singular incident in the daily life of the perpetrator, and there's no residual effect. So there is no harm done. Why are you so upset? Why are you upset that someone was touching your hair because your hair looked different today? Well, this is just one more micro invalidation that has happened over this day, over this week, over this year, and it's cumulative.
So perceived harm of racial microaggressions. For our students of color, this is why education and who's in front of them is so important. This is why they want sessions to take place like this, because of the issues that we're getting into in this session. So when we deal with perceived harm of racial microaggressions, for people of color, it's believed that concerning the microaggressive incident, no matter how subtle or how small it is, it's still hurtful. It's physiologically and physically harmful and stressful. For white people, believe that concerning the microaggressive incident, people of color are overreacting or being overly sensitive or being petty. So just as Michelle stated in the last text, it's you're wearing your emotions on your sleeve. You're thinking too much of it. I was just joking. It's not that serious. And these things are dismissive concerning the potential harm to the victim. So by just saying that it's no big deal or I was just joking, it does not repair the damage that has already been taking place with the person of color. What we have to remember is that students of color carry these microaggressions with them and these experiences with them everywhere they go. And these happen on a daily basis. So whether that's in the dorms, in the hallways, in the classrooms, at lunch, they are carrying these experiences and these harmful microaggressions with them everywhere they go. So what would it look like if a professor took the time to say my name correctly versus saying it incorrectly? What would it look like if I wasn't charged with speaking for my entire race? These are the things that we need to be focusing on. These are how we shift culture. These are how we make change.
Yeah. And Kieychia, and our focus is really on our students and how they are experiencing these things. But faculty and staff, this is also something real for us as well. Microaggressions isn't just something for our students, but microaggressions get directed towards faculty and staff. And there's just this whole other kind of process of how do we deal with this? How do we navigate this? How do we deal with the student who is in the classroom, who is continually hurling microaggressions towards us? Back when I was teaching sociology full-time, there was one semester, there was a semester from hell. It just was, because of this handful of students that were in the class, and one in particular, whenever he showed up in my class, suddenly he was speaking in Ebonics. He wasn't doing that before the class. He wasn't doing that somewhere else. But all of a sudden, when he got into my class, he had an urban Black accent. And then other things that were happening, I don't want to go in because I don't want to re-trigger myself, but those are the kinds of things that faculty and staff of color experience as well. Being questioned like, why are you here? Now, in exactly those words, why are you here? Why are you still here? Not like, hey, why are you still here? You have so much potential. You could go anywhere, but okay, why are you still here? Almost like we thought we got rid of you, or you don't belong here. All of those things still happen, but we don't always report them. And for me, one of the adding salt to the wound is that our students are experiencing these things and they don't report them. even though it is possible for them to report, they don't report this. They just assume this is the way that it is here. And I'm not just projecting. I know this when my son was here and he was experiencing some things. I said, why didn't you tell me? I'm his mom and I'm doing the diversity work. Why aren't you telling me? Or he would tell me some of the things that his friends were experiencing. Why aren't you telling us? He said, we just know this is the way that it is here. It should not be that our students of color are thinking, again, this is not all students of color, but for one, if it's just one, it's one too many. Why is the expectation that if I say something, nothing's really going to happen? Or if I say, or this is just the way that it is. This is what it means to be on a predominantly white campus.
It's interesting that you say that, Michelle, because oftentimes over the past 6 years that I've worked at Calvin, we have students floating into our office all the time talking about microaggressions and things that they were experiencing. And after hearing the same narrative over and over again, I made a conscious decision to enroll myself in Calvin as a student, just to see exactly what was happening in the classroom. And I was floored. Again, it's not all professors, but the microaggressions are real and they are hurtful. And sometimes they are unknowing and sometimes they're overt. Mm-hmm. And so we have to make a change. We have to make a shift because it's not okay, because we're tearing down people. We're tearing down the next generation. And it's not okay. And when we do that and don't have apology or deal with certain things that are happening in the classroom right there, it does not help the cause. It feeds the narrative that is already there.
Yeah. Oh, this one. Is this me?
This is you. This is you.
This one, this dilemma, the catch-22 of responding. Oh, wow. Yeah. In a sense, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. That's the bottom line of this. But as you can see, right? So here's this microaggressive incident happens. Okay, so now what do I do? How do I respond? If I ignore it, right, then it sends the message that it was insignificant, that it doesn't matter. If I attack it, if I say, hey, aggressively, and if I give as much energy into it as I feel it, then it's like, oh, okay, then it feeds into the stereotypes. Oh, you all are just so angry. You all are just all over the top. If I attack it, it becomes like you have the problem, as opposed to, hey, there's a situation here that I'd like to draw attention to. If I say I want to discuss it, then I'm playing the race card. Like, oh, okay, you got to bring race into this. So that's not what I meant. And so there we have the bottom line, right? It's this catch-22. If I say something about it, then you're going to look at me one way and I'm going to be cast into this image, cast into this character. If I don't say anything and I just stuff it, then I'm doing harm to myself as well as I'm giving a signal that it wasn't that big of a deal in the first place. And then sometimes, quite honestly, for myself, if I was, so Gerald Wing Sue had responsible for all of these, but if I were to add one more, I would just say, and if I'm just too tired or if I'm just too wounded to do the work, to bring it up, then again, I take this into my very soul, and my soul becomes damaged. How I view other people, I start avoiding other people in anticipation that this is what's going to happen. If I just don't feel like being in education mode that moment, or if I'm just so stunned, because that's also something that happens. If we are so stunned in the moment, we can't say anything. And then we want to bring it up the next time, right? The next time we have class, the next time we meet with that individual, there's fear that if I bring it up then when I am emotionally ready, that it's going to be perceived as I'm playing the race card, or I'm trying to make a big deal out of something that wasn't such a big deal. Because if it was such a big deal, why didn't you say something then? I didn't say something then because I was stunned that it actually happened, or I'm still trying to figure out, okay, was that a joke? Was that not a joke? Is this person just being a jerk? Or does this person really feel this? Am I threatened? Okay. Am I safe? We're going through all of those calculations. And then we're just worn out and tired.
So these are some pictures of students that have passed undergraduate work and now are in graduate school, but just some of the things that they have experienced. So you're not a real Asian. My hair is not a petting zoo. I was asked my race before being asked my name. My eyes are wide open. So these are some of the things that they've experienced both on and off campus. If I was to add to this list based on what I hear from students, it would be, can I touch your hair? Or just outright touching your hair without permission. Or you speak very well. You're very articulate.
And it's, and when we receive these things, you take it in. So just trying to figure out what to do. And so these students were part of the several years ago of We Are Calvin Too campaign. And these are just some of the things that students were saying back then. Unfortunately, it's still the things that students are saying now. And hear this, these are things that are happening. And there's less opportunity to have conversations now because of the pandemic, because of social distancing. Because of social distancing, we don't find ourselves easily being able to have intimate conversations with one another to say, hey, can I speak to you or take you outside? We just hear it and it's in the air. And I have to add this, when something like this is said within earshot of a faculty member, and a faculty member does not say anything, that student is feeling like the faculty member thinks the same thing, and it doesn't feel safe. Yeah. What can you do as a faculty or staff member? Kieychia, give us the first couple of points.
You can become aware of your own personal and racial biases based on upbringing and family origins and present day biases. You can explore your own racial identity and your feelings about other racial groups. That is so important. Your feelings about other racial groups. When you are becoming an ally for a student of color, let me stress, it is not the time for you to ration out your feelings about other racial groups. It is a time to come alongside that student and be there for that student. Become aware of the existence of racial microaggressions. They are real. They do happen every day, multiple times a day. Increase your ability of identifying racial microaggressions in general and in yourself in particular.
And then also, what can faculty and staff do? You can become aware of how stereotypes are perpetrated in society. Being careful not to tokenize other people, not to say, oh, we got one and we don't have to do any more work. Be careful about making them the racial representative for the entire race of people. Faculty or staff, when you are interacting with either a student or another person of color, your colleagues, faculty or staff, please do not ask them. So, as a South Korean, how does South Korea feel about this? As a Black person, how does Black America feel about this? This happens
more times than not.
More times than I would care to even want to admit that it happens. So be careful. So there's a difference, and there's a difference between you're in relationship with someone and you're asking them, so Kieychia, how do you feel about this? How are you experiencing this? Then Kieychia, how does Black Grand Rapids feel about the police? Right? That's a whole
big difference.
Thing. And it assumes that we know our history better than someone else, which is not necessarily true because we've gone through the same educational system, so we might not know the history. It assumes that we want to talk about race and diversity with the person who is asking the question, and we might not feel like we're prepared. Most want to have advance warning that we're going to have a conversation about something so we can sound knowledgeable, right? Because there's this kind of stereotype threat that if I say something and I'm not right, right? This is purely hypothetical, but I have a history professor asking me about a Black experience in a particular time of history. I'm just guessing what it might be, and I'm wrong. And the professor is then going to tell me that I'm wrong because they have expertise in that area, right? Or my expressions, my feelings are dismissed. Are you really sure? How do you know? Right? That's the I gotcha question afterwards. How do you know? So be aware of that. It's very easy to slip into, and I know as we have more diverse students in our classrooms, we want to pull on those experiences. But don't just put people on the spot. When I was teaching, I would have individual meetings with all my students before class start, as the semester was going on, and I would say, hey, at certain times we're going to be talking about this. In my head, you might have something to contribute. Would you mind if I call on you? So that we already have it set up, we already have some permissions, or ask for volunteers, or ask people to write something out and hand it over, right? So all those are different ways. Another one, look at racism from the perspective of others. Don't just look at it from how are you experiencing it, but how might other people be experiencing? What are we asking? How are we asking people of color to show up after another incident has happened that has made headline news, right? How are we asking them to show up the next day? Something happened the night before, and are you expecting your colleagues of color, your students of color to go on as if nothing has impacted them? Sometimes we can do it. A lot of times we can't, especially in this season when it's one thing after another thing after another thing. But look at racism from the perspectives of others. Understand how racial microaggressions impact people of color. And then address fears. And this one, really address your own fears about maybe saying the wrong thing or being someone say, oh, you're racist. We're not often looking for the racist, but address your fears, because if you're fearful of saying something, if you're fearful of interrupting a microaggression and you say nothing, then you're allowing it to continue on. So accept the responsibility for taking corrective actions to overcome racial biases. If you are genuinely fearful of a particular people group, address that fear. Ask yourself, where is it coming from? Is it from a bad experience that you had? Okay, face the experience, unpack it so that you can see the people who are in front of you who look like the people that were involved in that bad experience, but they aren't those people. Right? That's what I would like to put to that.
I'm committed a microaggression. Now what? First thing, CPR. Calm yourself, practice humility, and repair. So what does calm yourself look like? Take a deep breath, collect your thoughts, resist defending yourself. I cannot repeat that one enough. Resist defending yourself. Remember, this feels scarier than it is. It is repairable. Something can be done. P, practice humility. Elevate the harm you caused over your own comfort. So you have to put the needs of others over how you're currently feeling. Take responsibility for your actions and focus on the impact of words or actions, not your intent. We have to keep in mind with this one, it's particularly, this is a particularly vulnerable stage because the person has already been damaged and impacted, and now it's time to do the hard work. So under repair, center the relationship, not your feelings or reputation. It's no longer about you. It's about how that person has been impacted and how they're currently feeling. Ask, what can you do? That's always a good starting point. Accept that repairing the relationship might take time. You are just starting the process now. So the repair process probably won't happen overnight, And I'm sorry, probably won't fix the damage. It's going to take work and it's going to take time. And you have to allow space for processing and healing to take place. Responses that do harm. You're just being sensitive. I didn't mean it like that. You shouldn't be offended. I heard that one just today. I was just kidding. Not a big deal. These are harmful responses and should not be in our vocabulary when we're dealing with students of color or even faculty of staff of color.
And when someone says, "Hey, that was a microaggression," or "Hey, you offended me," it sets you back. No one. I believe most people in the Calvin community, by far the vast majority, don't want to be guilty of committing a microaggression. They don't want to, and mean well. But if someone says, "Hey, this is what happened. This is how I felt when you did that," it hurts. But again, if you practice CPR, take a deep breath, try to focus on what someone is trying to communicate, because if they've said something, they're trying to repair the relationship. We need to be afraid when people don't say anything anymore, because when people stop speaking up about how they're being impacted by the microaggressions, that means they're on their way out of this place. That means they are getting ready to leave the institution, whether they have another job set up or not, whether they have another institution set up to go to, another college or university. Sometimes they're just saying, "You know what, I have had enough. It's not worth it anymore." So if someone is speaking up, that's an opportunity to build relationship. It's an opportunity to start the healing process. It's an opportunity to grow in your own awareness. So, and you might be saying at this point, "Wait a minute, I thought this session was called racial fatigue. Why have we spent nearly 45 minutes talking about racial microaggressions?" And I would say to that, good question. And the reason it's a good question is because the very definition of racial battle fatigue centers around microaggressions. Think of it this way. Racial battle fatigue is the cumulative effect of these 3 to 5 or more daily microaggressions happening, right? So we get to racial battle fatigue when we get to that space when we've been pushed and pushed and pushed, when we have been insulted, assaulted, and invalidated over time. It's fatiguing. It's the stress that builds up over time. So this definition of racial battle fatigue by Dr. William Smith is just, it's a framework for understanding the cumulative race-related experiences of people of color.
So here we have a chart of what this actually does. So racial microaggressions is in the center. We have behavioral stress responses, psychological stress responses, physiological stress responses, and it goes on and on and on. It's in a constant loop. It's like a song that you cannot get out of your head over and over and over again. And so the damage is constantly being done. The feelings are there and they're being replayed over again, especially if there's no reconciliation that is taking place and no CPR that is taking place. And then this plays out again in certain forms and fashions with the student itself, in the classroom, in the dorms, in the lunchroom, having to prepare to go to those spaces because you know that you're going to come up on a microaggression, or you're going to be asked certain things that put you in the spotlight or put you in direct attention of others.
Mm-hmm. And an example of a psychological stress response would be internalized racial oppression. Okay, I am less than. Maybe I'm not good enough to be here. I am less than. Maybe it's me. That's just really starting a path towards doubting the self and seeing yourself by incorporating all those negative stereotypes about people that looks like you. That's an example of this kind of psychological stress response going in that way. Physiological, just the health concerns. Research has been done to show if we have all things are held equal in terms of family background, socioeconomic status, and all like that, education, two-parent household, all like that, there is still a disparity. There is still a disparity in health, still a disparity in high blood pressure. We're talking for adults, but also in this age as well. They can't account for it by anything other than the daily experiences of racism. And then behavioral, we've talked about that a little bit earlier, but secluding oneself, isolating oneself, right? So I know people aren't going to say, I've experienced people not saying hi back on the pathway. So I'm just going to make sure I have my headphones on and I look down. So I look like I'm preoccupied, because when I have tried to be friendly, when I have tried to say hi, people look right through me or right past me like I didn't say anything. So I'm going to hold myself back. I'm not going to try to join a particular group because I don't know if they're going to accept me. That's kind of a behavioral or acting out in some other ways.
Another example that our students experience on campus is planning to go to lunch, planning to go with friends so that they're not that only one, figuring out where they can and can't sit in the dining halls, planning where they're going to sit if they have a friend or a safe space in the classroom so that it won't be them on the spotlight or in the forefront of things.
Mm-hmm. So just that anticipatory work, right? It's there. So how do we cope, right? So we talked about what happens if you committed a microaggression. What are those steps that you can take? CPR. So now we want to talk specifically for faculty, staff, student of color. What are those ways to cope? One of my favorite quotes is by Audre Lorde. I have this on my wall in my office at campus. It's here in my office at home. It's just a reminder that caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. This work, doing diversity work, for me is political warfare. And I'm not talking about the political things that are going on nationally in this presidential season, election season. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about navigating life, right? And so what are some of those strategies that we can apply? And some will work for one context and then others work in a different context in one season of life as opposed to another season of life, or where you have agency and where you might not have agency. But first, particularly as people of faith, is that communion. It's just connecting with the Lord, connecting with God, connecting with our Creator, because we know our Creator did not make a mistake. Our Creator was intentional when we were fashioned, when we were created. So connecting with God in prayer, through scripture reading, grounding ourselves, reminding ourselves that we were created for purpose, on purpose. Confrontation, where we feel we have agency, is to speak up, report it, seek an end to the behavior that is fatiguing. It's like, I've had enough. You've been saying that same comment when I walk into the room, for this far into the semester. I'm going to say something now. So let me jump back to that semester from hell. So about 3/4 of the way, yes, it took that long. 3/4 of the way into the semester, had a private meeting with that student and reminded that student that I had the power of the grade book. So you will, what are you going to do? This is what it feels like. And if you continue doing that, remember, there's a climate grade as well about how you are participating, and this is not participation, right? Community, finding like-minded colleagues and students, or people outside of campus. Find your community, find your safe place, find those people who get it so you don't have to explain, so that you can tell someone, look, I just experienced this, I think it's a microaggression, without someone saying, do you really think that was a microaggression? That didn't hurt that bad, did it? Come on, they didn't mean that, they didn't know. But having that place where you can just go and say, this is what I am feeling, and feel validated. It's not that it's necessarily going to be fixed in that moment, but feeling like you've been heard, feeling like you've been seen, feeling like I'm not here by myself or alone, so that I'm finding those like-minded people. And let me just throw this in there just for extra. I know we're in the times of COVID, but before the times of COVID and after the times of COVID, if you see a group of faculty and staff or a group of students of color who are in the hallway talking, please don't walk by and say, I hope you're not up to any trouble. I hope you're not planning anything. It's not funny. It's not funny. I can tell you we're already very conscious that we are together in a group and that we're having conversation, and we are mindful of who's walking by us and what they might be thinking because we dare to be together in a group. We don't walk by white people all together and say, I hope you're not up to any trouble, but we think it's a joke when we say that to people of color. And oftentimes, believe it or not, we don't run into each other as much as you might think we might run into each other. So when we actually see each other and we dare to linger a little longer in one another's presence, and to share a laugh, to keep from crying or to keep from pulling our hair out, or just to recognize our humanity in one another, and then to have someone walk by and just casually throw out there, I hope you're not up to any trouble, trying to be funny. That's not funny. Care, self-care and recreation on a regular basis, making the time to care for ourselves. We have to prioritize that. And then conviction. Conviction is what keeps me here at Calvin. Reaffirming my internal values for diversity and justice. To me, diversity and justice go hand in hand because I believe that's what the scripture calls us to.
So here we have some resources. Michelle, am I correct that some of these are online for free?
Yes, so the two books by Kieychia Likely, But I'm Not Racist is actually the book group that I am offering this semester. It's also something all of Cabinet is reading this semester as well. So, But I'm Not a Racist and In It for the Long Haul are both books that are available free download, of course, in an electronic format. You're welcome to, order the book on Amazon or some other place and pay for it. But for right now, you can download it for free. If you just Google Kieychia Likely, you can go to our website and you can get those books for free. And then the other book is also, it's not free, the other one, but Racial Battle Fatigue in Higher Education. Wanted to show that because there's actually been work done on this. There's been research done on this. It's a real thing. Racial battle fatigue in higher education is present. It's present on our campus. We are working through it, but it gets tiring. And the purpose of this session was just to raise awareness of this big concept of racial battle fatigue, to raise awareness about the impact of racial microaggressions. And we can have other sessions to talk about other types of microaggressions. I mean, there's a whole nother session we can do on gender microaggressions, right? Asking a female student, still to this day, is she here because you're here to get your MRS degree? I mean, that happened when I was a student at Calvin in 77. And my response was, look at me. Do you really think I'm here to get my MRS degree? But that's still happening to students. I just had a female student last year tell me that was something that someone had asked her. So we can talk about other forms of microaggressions, but today we wanted to focus specifically on racial microaggressions under this larger canopy of racial battle fatigue, that's under this larger canopy of all the things that have been happening this spring, this spring and this summer, fall. And I think, there's this special day, November 3rd, that is going to be popping up. And I think we're going to see even more overt acts of aggression that are based on race, as well as racial microaggressions that are happening in the days that follow. I hope that I am wrong, but past practices tell me that I'm not wrong.
If
And
you
so this, pardon me?
I was going to say, if you have a student who comes to you and displaying some of those things that have happened to them, please encourage them to report it. Because
Yes.
if they report it, then we can shift culture, we can make change. It is so important for them to report it.
And how they report is going through safer spaces, put it in the system, we'll address it. So even those things that don't rise to the level of a safer spaces violation or a policy violation, we can still do educational interventions. It doesn't make chimes. We don't put it out in the newspaper. We don't out people to say, well, Michelle Loyd-Paige is working with these faculty members because they were reported for committing some racial microaggressions. We don't put it out there, but believe me, those conversations are happening and we do see changes, but we can't make those changes unless those things are reported. And if you don't know what to say to someone, send them through safer spaces or send them to me, send them to Kieychia so that we can talk about it, because we don't want people just to hold this in. And I think someone had asked if this presentation was going to be sent out. I know that I can put it on the diversity and inclusion resource page in SharePoint. So I will upload it there, but you can also email me and I can send it that way. I'm just not skilled enough to know how to put it up in WebEx right now. All right. And so something to say, questions, want to share your story. There is a discussion room. Wow, we timed this just right. That will happen in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, because when I stop sharing my screen, there we go. When I stop sharing my screen, then I can get back to the chat. And when I get back to the chat, you'll notice that I'm trying to stall a little bit, because what I'm going to do is over here in the chat, I'm sorry, I should have done this a little bit earlier, is paste the link to the room that we'll be going to. You'll allow us about 5 minutes or so to switch platforms to get there. We will be there directly. But I just want to say to everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I will send this presentation. I will have it. Don't look for it until Monday. It's been a long week. I will have this presentation in the diversity inclusion resource page. But again, if you have trouble accessing that, just send me an email. I'm more than happy to share this with you. But thank you so very much. Oh, and don't forget, if you are Calvin faculty or staff, please don't forget to report this as a cultural competency professional development activity. Go to your Sharewell site. And if you don't remember how to do that, then also go to that diversity inclusion resource page, and I'll have something, well, it looks like it'll be in Tuesday's Calvin News now, about how you can do that. All right, but thank you so very much for participating in this week-long conversation about race, racism, and anti-racism. Please know that as the Executive Associate to the President for Diversity and Inclusion, your participation this week has been lifting to my heart and to my spirits. And please know that I believe Calvin is doing great work, but I also believe that there is much more that we can be doing. And I'm glad that you are on the journey with us. Glad that you are here. So thank you, and we'll see you all later.